I just saw a quick message in the chat. So quick message in Q&A that the chat may not be working for participants. I'm not sure.
Oh, it seems to be disabled. Okay, we'll look into that. So if the chat is disabled for now, don't worry about it. Questions are where we need to go. Q&A questions.
Perfect. So
thank you for noticing that while I was babbling.
No worries. We'll back each other up, right? And let me just get the presentation going. 1 second. Excellent. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much.
So hello, everyone. It's great to be here. And we want to talk about digital transformation. And while this word is on everybody's mind, we are not always have the same idea about what it means. And especially we don't always understand what does business analyst have to do with it. And business analyst actually plays a huge role. And today, of course, our focus will be on data and on data issues and how business analysts can support managing data and data transformation during these huge initiatives. So I'll do a quick intro. We'll talk about our case studies. We have 2 case studies today. I'll focus on challenges and obstacles and issues, and then I'll tell you what happened in those particular 2 case studies, which I had personal experience with. And then hopefully, if you have any ideas or if you want to share your own experiences, feel free to use either chat or Q&A. And I'll be happy to hear what you think, because it's a very difficult undertaking to start digital transformation, especially if you want to know why we want to do it, why do we want to change, why does our organization need to transform? So what do we mean when we talk about digital transformations and what is involved? Often it means that we digitize and automate things we used to do manually, right? We have processes, we have workflows that have been done a certain way for many years, and now we want to digitize, automate it. Often that also impacts human interaction. So we move those human interactions to digital, to omni-channel. Even more than that, for many companies, nowadays, technology or that technological product sometimes becomes part of their product and service. And that could also be a core of their digital transformation. And these digital transformations usually require huge changes, organizational changes and cultural changes on top of technology. But for our focus today, and the reason I mentioned all these points is because of all these reasons, these digital transformations expose and drive attention to data quality issues, to integrity issues, and to data security challenges. So this will be our focus for today, because of course we can talk about digital transformations for days and will not be done, right? So here are the 2 case studies I wanted to focus on today, because of course, using examples just makes using all those big words so much easier to understand, right? So my first case is commercial insurance. And in this case, and again, just let me introduce it and just think about how complex it can be. So we have merger of 2 insurance companies, commercial insurance companies, and commercial insurance products are much more complicated than personal. These companies have different customer acquisition models, broker versus agent, and I'll explain where the big differences are. These 2 companies had different compensation structures, different coverages, different policy conditions, different treatment of commercial customers. So much of it was different in their business models. And of course, these 2 companies had 2 sets of all the systems, right? So imagine if you try to transform those 2 companies as they merge, how much complexity you're going to encounter. So in this particular case, the goal of transformation was elimination of all these duplicate systems and moving all the processes and both companies to a single platform. Piece of cake, right?
Yeah, not a piece of cake.
The second case, a different type of transformation, no mergers. So there is a big company, pension fund in this case. And this company has this big, large, overgrown legacy application. You probably have encountered some of them in your own professional past. This application does a lot of things, but not everything. The gaps are filled by little satellite applications, macros, spreadsheets, you name it, even SharePoint lists. And very few integrations exist, right? So whenever data needs to move around, it moves around manually through downloading, uploading files, and residing on people's drives. Among all these issues with legacy applications is an increasing defect log. And if anyone is familiar with pension industry and knows what defined benefit plans are like, their calculations are very complicated. So as you encounter defects that impact calculations, you end up with incorrect values, incorrect calculations that may actually impact your customers financially. For example, you don't calculate their pension correctly. So this particular case study, the goal was to replace this legacy platform with modern and fully integrated platform. No merging, but a full taking out of an old and in with the new. Again, piece of cake. All right, so.
Did you see similarities, Yulia, between the two cases, or were they really divergently different?
They were very different in terms of the first one didn't necessarily have the goal of transforming business in a major way. And it was part of the challenge. Do you find a compromise? Is one set of systems superior to the other? Or do you want to kind of get rid of both of them and implement the third one? So that one was more complex. And of course, it had political underlying I guess, tone as well. The second one, everyone agreed that nobody likes legacy system anymore. So there was no necessarily resistance to replacing it. Mm-hmm. And the challenge was really in calculations and in data and in even figuring out what's wrong with old data. So I think they were very different, but what was, I guess, similar is that everyone underestimated severely the data challenges, right? And this is why I brought both of them together today.
Thank you for that explanation.
For sure. So the first case, and this is just to recap. So our commercial insurance company, different everything, different customer acquisition models, different treatment of customers. Imagine trying to plan how to bring those two companies on the same digital platform. So of course, there was a certain transformation in place at first. And in this case, after various deliberations, there was an idea, choose a new platform, migrate customers and policies from company A first, and choosing a simpler company because it's easier to do, and then adjust, and then take the next company and move it to the new platform as well. So a little bit of a waterfall approach to transformation, deal with first company, then deal with second company. But of course, if you're a business analyst or if you're in data world, you probably already feel uneasy, right, with this strategy.
Yes.
There's something here that bothers you, and maybe a few things, but let me tell you, I was involved in that and with a group of business analysts, and we started to ask questions because we also were bothered by this strategy, and we thought it can be as simple as that strategy presents it. So what business analysts can do in this case, and the things that we've done, is we started to ask questions, right? In this case, we asked, well, let's look at both companies. What is the definition of customer in each case? Who owns those relationships? Do you have customer hierarchies? What are the rules for those? Can a customers have multiple policies? So we started to dig in conceptual data models. How do you manage customers? What happens when customer leave and return? Is it the same customer? So many questions, even if you just focus on customer model alone. And we've discovered some interesting things. So first of all, company A, and you can see a simplified model here. Company A was dealing with customers that were both individual and commercial and businesses. So they had the relationship, and that relationship would manage through distribution partners, brokers, independent distribution partners that were receiving commissions. So you could only deal with your customers through this independent broker, and those brokers were not ours. They also dealt with other insurance companies. So that was the whole business model. So that was company A. Then we said, well, what about company B? What is their customer relationship model like? And it was very different. First of all, company B only had commercial customers, no individual. Secondly, the relationship was with agents who were employees of that company. They were only servicing company B. They were employed by company B. They received their compensation through keeping these customers happy. And it was much simpler and very different. Now, imagine if you start implementing your transformation with company B without analyzing company A. So when we put those two models next to each other, we looked at them, and then someone said, oh, and by the way, and because we were asking, well, if these two sets of customers, are they going to be completely different? Or is company A and company B, could they be competing with each other? Are they allowed to compete with each other? What's going to happen? Because now it's going to be one company. So we discovered that the main premise for the new merger is that these two divisions of the same organization, now, of course, they're not two companies anymore. They cannot compete with each other anymore. They're not allowed to compete for the same customers because it doesn't make sense, and you probably want to just, and that's where all the alarm bells rang, because how can you implement and support no compete rules if you don't know who belongs to which company? So you can't possibly just design a system for one migration and then append to the other without understanding those relationships, because you will never know whether this is the same customer here and here. We started to dig in a little more. Well, let's understand better, what are your customers in each case? And company A had pretty complex business structure already. They were supporting hierarchies, and you can see in the little picture, and a business analyst can do simple pictures that don't necessarily look strictly aligned to any modeling notation. It could be something super, super simple just to create a dialogue. So in this case, through these pictures, we discovered that customers have hierarchy, right? So parent company, children, sometimes grandchildren, just like in real business world. And policies can be created at different levels. You can have a policy at a parent level, or policy at the child level, or even both. It depends on coverages, on historical, on grandparenting of policies. Again, it depended on so many things. And of course, you had customer IDs at different levels. And one of the most challenging items was that it turned out that parent and child identifiers weren't even always connected, or horror. How do you know that they belong together? So this already was really troubling. Then we looked at company B, and we were worried. What happens if parent and child policies remain disconnected? What would happen? Company B was very different. You have your policies at a parent level, and it covers all of your children. Your customer IDs are only assigned at a parent level. And as we looked at this more and more, and I realized in a webinar, we cannot really kind of dig in and do proper analysis, but just looking at these complexities and this variation in at what level relationships can happen, at what level you can have a contract like a policy, told us that we are in trouble. For example, if company B is the first one on transformation roadmap with its simplified structure, what are we going to do when we start looking at company A? And how can we possibly support those non-compete rules if you don't know what is the same customer, especially when we talk about commercial customers, right? So we started to list all these issues. What about our target customer model? Should it accommodate both companies? Is it possible? How complex it is going to be? How is our data quality? If we create this target customer model that is complex enough to accommodate everything we have today in both worlds, do we have enough data to support the model? In case of this first company, what if you can't connect parent to child because historically they were disconnected and maybe different brokers had relationships with different levels? can we support it? And if not, do we need to make changes to how customer data is managed in one company or both companies? And if we were to do that, how is it going to affect the business model and processes and everything else? Is it like really realistic to do that? So those were a hefty number of issues already, just looking at customer structure.
Julia, a question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. You said on the prior slide, is the data rich enough? How did you determine what the company meant by rich?
So that was basically our question, whether the data was rich enough, because in a way, this is where each of the companies is thinking in their own terms. To them, their own data is rich enough, is good enough, because we have what we've always had. But then when we started to look at potential merging these two worlds, especially to support no compete rule, we realized that we need that layer of useful information. So as we say, not just data with customer IDs, but we need the more useful information, which in this case is connection, either a connection to your parent or your grandparent. So that the data may not have we may not have needed such a rich data in separate worlds, but we need to enrich it before we bring it together. So really we dared to introduce this term, data enrichment, at this stage, and just kind of try to explain it with examples and with pictures.
Okay, so a lot of the richness what came from increased usage of metadata, increased capture of metadata.
That would definitely, yeah, that would definitely be a big part. Another part of it was if, for example, if you for some reason don't have a relationship in your data model and you need to add it, you need enough matching criteria to do the matching. Basically, imagine you have parents and children. How do you figure out that they're connected? You need to use rich data in terms of certain fields and attributes of your commercial entities to be able to match and figure out whether they are related or not.
Okay, thank you.
No worries, no worries. And interestingly enough, for this richness of data, the geographical information also came into play, because when we talk about commercial customers, you talk about their properties, buildings, big buildings, small buildings, sites, territories, addresses, and that became even harder to figure out, because now we talk about physical properties, and property data models can get pretty intricate, let's just say.
Okay.
So with these issues now, we asked more questions, right? What customer identifiers should we use in target platform? Do we keep existing ones? Do we keep one from company A and convert company B? Or do we come up with completely new identifiers? And in each case, what it means and what kind of mapping needs to be supported? Do we need to maintain some kind of grandfathering? What would be the mapping? What needs to be done to create the mapping? How will we identify this parent and child relationships? And all of that really comes down to, how do you know what are the same customers, what are different customers, and where we are not allowed to compete, and so on. So these were some hefty questions. And of course, and I want to emphasize, it's not necessarily for business analysts to resolve these questions. I realize it may be for data architects and for data designers to resolve, but it is up to business analysts to discover these issues and gaps sometimes, because they have this closer relationship with business, and to pose the questions, right? Sometimes I say that our value as business analysts is not necessarily in answering the questions, but in asking the right questions and making sure that they are addressed.
Would you also say that the role of the business analyst, Julia, is to facilitate gathering the right subject matter experts from both business and technology into one room, virtually or in person, to get all the different players to hear the question the same way?
For sure, absolutely. And that facilitation component is huge. And especially in cases like this, where, sometimes on the technical side, someone will say, oh, this doesn't make sense. Why are you even doing it? And sometimes technical people can, alienate business stakeholders a little bit by being too literal or too direct, with their judgments, right? Because they think maybe from architecture perspective. But again, these are real businesses, they have to deal with their real issues. They have to make money. They have to pay wages and so on. So sometimes there are reasons for doing things, even if it's imperfect. And I think it's part of business analyst role to be in the middle, because we don't want to be controversial. We don't want to become enemies, right? Business analysts can help translate why things were done this way. What are maybe some nuances where for some reason a certain structure existed. Again, perhaps there was a business background there. So you can help explain it to technical people. And it really is like the business requirements that sometimes business people can't even express, but you can help them and say, look, this is how business would have worked. We need to accommodate it. Perhaps we can move it, support it, translate it, map it, but not being so, I guess, abrupt in terms of saying whatever you've done is wrong, we'll do it new way, because usually that fails, right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
No worries, no worries. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of a second case, because I do want to talk about, well, what happened next, right? This is just the intrigue, just the problem. We want to know what we've done about the problem. So with our pension fund, the challenge was different, but still big enough. So what happened is, again, the data gets pretty complex, and the accuracy of data in the legacy system started to suffer because of defects. And again, the more you have calculations and calculations compounding on top of other calculations, you can imagine what happens if you had a defect a few years ago and that maybe the data issue wasn't fixed. So these compounding defects accumulated to a point where you start to struggle to figure out like some essential important values and metrics that you're supposed to track in this system. And one of the challenges for transformation specifically was, okay, we know we have lots of defects. We know we have lots of data issues. Now, what do? We have a certain timeline for our supposed transformation. Should all those defects be investigated and fixed before we migrate data? Because we want to migrate data clean. That was the big $1 million question. And it took 2 years to answer this question, frankly. And I'll tell you how. So what happened was, the more those defects were analyzed, of course, we discovered more problems. Like it was even worse than we thought, because until you investigate it, you sometimes don't know the depths. And that defect investigation became a little bit of demoralizing factor. And I see, people hate investigating data issues, but anything that has to do with calculations is even worse, right? Because it's just like, it's so easy to make a mistake.
Yes.
So that planning of digital transformation kind of got stuck. Like we weren't sure what to do. Do you investigate all defects, clean them up in all system, and only then move? But then the more you discover, the more you say, oh, there's no way we can fix all of them. What do we do now? Do we stop everything, or do we have to continue with our business? So I'll tell you a little bit what actually we've done, but I wanted to pause for a second to see if there were any questions that we wanted to answer first.
Actually, we have 2 questions. One of them is about the case study pensions. And after migration, how do we ensure that resources should be minimized or remain the same after the digital transformation?
You mean like business resources that support
business, human resources.
Yeah. So of course, it's always a big question of digital transformation, right? Is it about optimizing resources? And in that particular case, because again, pension industry is so complex, and because the value of people, of experts, is so high. I mean, it's so hard to train. I actually had to do a long course for pension plan administration just to learn all the calculations, a college level course. One of the goals in that case was to take people away from servicing the mundane data management tasks and instead redirect those people to more complex tasks, because a lot of people were involved in literally checking the data in the system and checking calculations done by the system and verifying and running reports. So basically you had people who would do these mechanical tasks because the data quality in the system was insufficient, and that was not good use of resources. So it wasn't about optimizing the number of people hired or anything to do with staff reductions. It was more about to moving those people to investigating exceptions, to working on new changes in pension legislation, or to doing some of those smarter things, where machines are not smart enough to do them yet. So it really was about elevating the role of those people who just couldn't do that because they were constantly verifying and validating data.
Here's a question. I don't know if I'm going to say this properly because I've never heard of this. I'm not in business architecture. Have you used Mega's HOPEX to digitize the business architecture, the business processes that the business analyst, business architect would use to capture all of this stuff?
I have to admit, no, we haven't used that. We used more basic tools for capturing business processes and for capturing documentation. We use a lot of diagrams. We sometimes use Enterprise Architect, but I'm unfamiliar with this tool. I have to look it up now. Yeah,
I never heard of it. But I'm not a business architect, so I thought maybe if you had experience with the tool, that question could be answered. Let's move on.
All right, so let me move on, and then we can always stop again. So let me just make sure so let me tell you a little bit about outcomes. And I realize I'm skipping over a lot of things that happened, but I want to share with you what was decided to do next. And from there, what are the lessons learned? So first of all, we in first case, we actually insisted that both companies are involved upfront with architecture and with analysis. So we cannot just focus on one company and then deal with another company a year later. Just doesn't make sense. We wanted to make those major architecture decisions only after we've done proper business analysis, especially on their processes, on their customer acquisition models and relationships, and understanding different requirements for managing customers and so on. And we made a request that that common customer model that we do need must accommodate no compete rules. So otherwise, whatever we do next is not going to work. So we had to create common hierarchical data model because we went with the most difficult structure first. We need to accommodate it, and if company B is simplified, then that's fine, as long as our model is adjustable. We can accommodate company B easily then. And we defined that we need a separate mini project as preparation for this digital transformation to clean up company A's data. So if we had issues with unclean data or with missing parent-child relationships, we actually wanted to discover that using old system and its capabilities because it's more suitable. So we basically come up with a few prerequisites to this digital transformation, without which we believed it's not going to be successful. In case of pension fund, again, was a very different problem, but we had to face the challenge of calculations. We basically determined that because the more you look, the more issues you find, and as you start to find defect compounding on a defect, sometimes it makes sense to just start over, literally. And in pension world, it's called calculating from first principles, meaning forget all the calculations, go back to your original data. So if you think about conceptual model, your pension calculations are based on how many years and months you worked for different employers, what was your salary, what were all your bonuses and compensations, what were rules at that time, and sometimes it makes more sense to just recalculate everything. So basically, unless it was an issue that could be dealt with more confidently before migration, the decision was made to flag all of those records. So really the effort was put on flagging anything that might have been impacted by a defect and flagging those records for manual checks or checks by qualified people. And it resulted in having to do cleanup for a few years, but it didn't have to be all done at the same time, like big bang, because that's where, again, you risk even more errors, human errors. Instead, you basically deal with exceptional records when there is anything happening to that person, to your customer. Because again, in pensions, you don't always need the numbers. Those numbers, you need them when person has a significant life event, when they start their pension, or someone dies, or someone changes their beneficiaries. This is where you need to provide values, correct values to your customer. So at those times, you would be recalculating using the new system and new logic. So the most important part was to identify what needed recalculation. And then, of course, there needed to be a new business process that would include steps to deal with known data issues. And in that way, the compromise was, yes, we cannot fix all data issues. Let's at least make them known data issues. Let's flag them. And let's have a process of handling them through reconciliation, because you may come to a point where your transformation will never be done if you try to fix everything, right?
So what you did in effect was identify what really needed to be fixed, fix that, and then draw a parameter around that corrected stuff. Because if not, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You're never complete.
Exactly.
It's never really done. You're just
Yeah.
one set of paint, going back and doing another set.
Yeah, absolutely. And the most important part was to ensure that the new system would not go ahead with doing anything automatically if there was a flag in place, right? So just to making sure that there is basically a guard in place.
One question that we just had posed was about the data governance, data management, data quality roles. Did either of these cases show a need for data governance, data quality, data management roles? And if so, did the case help solidify the business case for that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as we get to lessons learned, definitely, that really was kind of a justification that executives understood of why you need data governance, right? Because usually you need to explain in economical terms, why do you need this new function? It's by explaining what would happen if you don't have it. And in case of pension fund, we needed to have data stewards and data owners of actuarial data and actuarial calculations.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
So let me just summarize, and I believe that maybe it will answer a couple of those questions, but if not, we can come back to questions, because there are some learning points from this. First of all, every digital transformation must deal with legacy data quality. You cannot pretend that this is not a problem. There's always a problem. It's just a matter of scale. So first of all, someone needs to be accountable for discovery of analysis of these quality issues. So you have to build it into your digital transformation plan, right? You must investigate how good is your data before you plan, and especially before you present any timelines to your sponsors. And another very important learning here was, and I think it applies to pretty much to any industry, that customer data is always the culprit, one of the major culprits. Customer data, customer relationships, customer hierarchies. There's so many other issues that stem from that, but if you don't investigate the quality of your customer data, you cannot proceed. It must be on the list of your impact analysis for any digital transformation.
Would you agree that not only customer data, but data about vendors, if you're in the case of the insurance companies, the vendors would be the variety of independent agents, brokers, and company agents from company B, whose data needs to be included in that. I've worked with some insurance companies who were independent agent, independent broker type of insurance companies, and the data on those institutions, organizations, those agents was less than stellar because it was captured at various points or not captured at all. Was that the case here?
Yeah, and in fact, you're making a good point, like any type of distribution channel information, right? Because really those brokers and agents, these are like distribution channels. Sometimes these channels are simple. Sometimes, again, there is several layers to your distribution channel. And I agree, definitely, that relationship is not always visible. Often the data about those isn't even captured anywhere within the company. And of course, that becomes even harder. And we end up with having emails and SharePoint lists, right? Instead of data that is structured in such a way that we can analyze it. So definitely, I can extend it to customer and channel data. Always seems to be a major issue, even though it should be like the first thing we think about, right? The quality of our customer data. So definitely dealing with that is always a case for any digital transformation. Another learning point was that strategy for tackling legacy data quality has to include few very important items. And first of all is data governance, making sure you have those data definitions, or if you didn't have them before, well, you must introduce them now as you prepare for your digital transformation. You cannot transform without having a common agreement of what everybody means. So definitely, I think companies that didn't have data governance before, maybe that should be an item in their digital transformation plan.
I would agree with that completely.
Yeah, and hopefully, again, many companies now already have data governance teams in place, or at least a couple of individuals. Definitely engage in them, but if they don't exist, there's the dire need to have that capability. Whether you call it data governance team or not, I mean, that's a different story. It may have some other, I guess, considerations, but you need to have someone who is doing this.
I think I'm going to steal that line, Yulia, for a post on datamanagementu.com about this webinar. The need to include data governance as a foundational function in any digital transformation, attributed, of course, to our presenter, Yulia Kosarenko. So if any of our participants in this webinar are LinkedIn subscribers, please visit datamanagementu.com's LinkedIn page and Yulia's page and comment on that phrase that I'll post probably tomorrow or Monday.
Thank you. Yeah, and absolutely. I think the more we can support this point, the more hopefully it will reach the right ears, because it's so important. So with this tackling legacy data quality, so yes, you need to have that foundation, and again, data governance knowledge and understanding of what are the goals of data governance. You need to also have the target data model. And sometimes, especially I find with all this fixation on agile, which I think is good if you approach it right, but you can't go so far that you say we don't even need data models. We're not going to design data anymore. We're just going to be agile about it. You cannot design target data model in an agile way. You have to think about it architecturally, right?
Agreed.
You have to, and again, to understand whether you have data quality issues, and usually you do. You have to conduct that root cause analysis. You have to look at your records, at your defects, at your data quality reports if you have them. So again, whatever you have, or if you don't, you have to do it. So you need to discover your data quality issues beforehand. Now, you can't always fix them in advance, just like it was the case with our pension plan. But at least we discovered them, we flagged them, and we prevented anything horrible from happening in the new system, because we didn't know we migrated bad data, right? At least we knew it was bad, and we would stop our automated flow to get the data fixed. Now, of course, I'm getting to business analyst role. I want to make sure I cover this, because again, it's a huge role that business analysts play. First of all, we want to start those business analysis activities as soon as possible. You can't just plan all your digital transformation and then call business analysts at the very end, because they can help you discover what needs to be in the scope of digital transformation. And that's very important. They can help you capture this current and future business model. And from data perspective, it's very important because it gives you this context for even knowing what data you need to analyze, where you might have issues. Business analysts can be huge resource for data governance teams. Wouldn't you agree, Anne-Marie?
Absolutely. Every successful data governance program I've worked in, and I've worked in more than I can count off the top of my head, has had business analysis involvement. Business analysts are an integral part of any enterprise data governance program, because as you said at the start of this webinar, the business analysts know the business areas in which they work. They know many of the issues, especially around data and the processes that interact on the data, and they understand who the stakeholders are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what business analysts are also good at? They can be sticklers for terminology, which is like,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
What do you mean when you say customer?
Yes.
What do you mean when you say prospect? Is this what you mean? And you discover that you may have gaps in your understanding and definitions.
Exactly. Is an agent different from a broker?
Yeah, exactly. How are they different?
What's the difference between a policy and a standard?
Right. Yeah. And what's the difference between building and site? And is it the same thing as property?
Right.
And so, usually it's not the same thing, but everybody has their own view of what it is.
And you need a common view. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest points in this learning point, is that the business analyst helps facilitate that common view to make it easier for things like data governance and data quality and metadata management and data architecture to be successful.
Absolutely. I think, honestly, I think business analysts, if they work closely with business architect and with data architect, that's already a huge improvement for any digital transformation. And that friendship needs to be there.
Oh, I like that word, that friendship. Yes, definitely collaboration and friendship. Did either of your cases point out the need for specific tools?
So tools are interesting. I think that tools can be super helpful. Now, in both of our my experiences from these two companies, we didn't really have a very sophisticated tools for discovering data issues and for doing that data analysis. I think, I mean, knowing what I know now with a few more years of experience, I think having more of those data exploration tools and, you know, maybe ability to do some data mining in advance would have helped us to find these data issues, you know, more explicitly and earlier on than discovering them through grapevine or sometimes stumbling by accident. Because again, in some cases, business analyst just learns about it after it was discovered in production, right? So I think that one of the huge lessons, and now because, you know, when I teach analytics, of course, I research all the various data discovery tools and so on. I think there's so many tools out there that they can help you analyze your data, even in production, and monitor it for health, and maybe help you discover data issues before someone complains.
Thank you.
So let me see. I mean, we talked a lot about business analysis role, and just really briefly, yeah, we want to use business analysts to support data governance, to ensure we have common definitions, but also to identify those gaps that, again, each of those gaps can point you to potential other data issues. Or as you hear different people arguing about a certain point, you can think, oh, if they're arguing, we might have to look into whether, you know, the process is also diverged, right? Because we have different understanding. But on the other side, again, we can always use business analysts. And there was a question, I think, about whether BA can be data architect. Definitely can work with data architect. But sometimes data architects can use business analysts as translators for their complex questions. Because what I can do as a business analyst, you know, I can do a picture like the one I've done before, Some data architects may be probably horrified for colors and for my kind of, rudimentary childish drawings, but these are the types of drawings that business stakeholders understand. I can't just show them a Sparks diagram, right? It's just too dry and too kind of, it looks a little scary. But if I do a little bit of a chicken scratch children's drawing to illustrate a data point, I'm more likely to get a response. So we can use it for that.
But a data architect and a business analyst really have different skills and different areas of responsibility. Yep. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. They have different skills. They need to collaborate.
Oh,
they
absolutely. The collaboration is important.
Right? They help each other, because I definitely went to my data architects all the time to understand some of those problems, right? I wasn't alone on this. I would go and consult with them, but then I would often be the one that would take that explanation, translate it into a couple of scenarios with funny company names, and that helps me to actually draw responses from my stakeholders, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And now in terms of risks and success factors, merging enterprises with different business models should raise all the red flags for you, because it usually means a lot of challenges and needs a lot of architecture effort upfront. It cannot be agile. Immature customer relationship management is another one. And again, we see it over and over again. Companies rush into getting their business done. They don't always keep track of customers, their relationship with customers, and often relationships between their customers, like households, or in commercial world, even more intricate. So this immature practice, again, leads to all the challenges with customer data. Lack of data governance, of course, I know we come back to it, but it is a huge risk factor. Compounding legacy system defects, this is what we saw in this pension plan company, can create such a chaos. Complex business logic, sometimes to a point where you can't even explain anymore why it exists. Lack of expert knowledge of legacy systems is a big challenge. And I added the last one at the bottom because I truly believe it. Lack of understanding of the business analyst role in digital transformation. Because again, while we have business people talking about transformations and their goals, business analysts can work on all of these items, and they can help. They can bring in useful information to the data architect. They can bring useful information to enterprise architect. They can facilitate those conversations. They can discover potential risk factors early, and maybe you can actually plan and mitigate them as part of your digital transformation project, instead of fighting fires or discovering it as a huge problem later on. So that role of business analyst can be pretty big. Sometimes, unfortunately, executive management doesn't understand it. They don't understand why they need analysts now. Why would we need, now we don't have any requirements, just move it from one system to another. And that's where sometimes problems are. So that brings us to our questions and answers. And we hopefully have still a few minutes.
We do have a question, and it's a question I'd like to have both of us answer. In the context of this presentation, can we say the business analyst role is the same as the data governance analyst role, or are these two roles different? Well, from my perspective, in data governance, they are two very different roles. The data governance analyst role is responsible for supporting the creation and the implementation of policies, practices, standards, and procedures around the use of data, the definition of data, the business glossary, the data dictionary, et cetera. That's metadata management, and facilitating the discovery of data quality rules, data quality issues to be remediated, et cetera. The business analyst role, Yulia, how would you describe that?
Yeah, business analysts help business figure out how to solve their problems. That's my simplified definition. But it's really about understanding business challenges and business needs, and together with your stakeholders, defining requirements of that future solution. it doesn't have to be system, right? It's not always a system. So I would say that a business analysis role is more all-encompassing because I care about data management requirements and business process requirements and jobs and responsibilities and training and non-functional requirements. I will collaborate with data groups, with data governance group, with data governance analyst, and you're lucky that if you have one, right? Or with a data architect. So depending on who you have. So to me, business analyst needs to be a relationship builder with all of these groups. And they become, it's like in this picture here, business analyst often is in the middle. They help to translate what business says to what data architect says, or they maybe explain what data governance is in plain terms, and they'll help to create those definitions, or they help to understand the difference between two similar terms. So I think it's a lot of collaboration, but definitely different accountabilities.
Yes, I agree with that completely. If there are any additional questions for Yulia, you can always find her on LinkedIn on her own page. And as a result of this presentation, we will be posting some of the questions on the Data Management U LinkedIn page that we hope that you as participants, Yulia as our valued presenter, and other members of the data management community will contribute answers, additional questions, more comments, etc. So please don't hesitate to go to Data Management U on LinkedIn and go to Yulia Kosarenko as well. We're happy that we are getting such great response for the webinar. Yulia, I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely, I'd love to. And I'd love to hear from everyone your experiences. I mean, you've heard about two of these case studies. Have you had similar experience or completely opposite experience, or maybe something similar happening in a different industry? I think this is so valuable, and definitely we can chat about it and use the Data Management University page perhaps to have a nice conversation, because digital transformations are so complex, and so often we hear about them failing or taking much longer or creating more problems than it was worth it. We have ability to make it better, and I think this is where data people, data architects and data governance group, and business analysts and business architects, we together can help solve it. It's not for one group versus the other.
I agree completely. Please come back in January. We are taking 2 months off for a variety of holidays, so you won't have a presentation in November or December. I wish everyone a great end of the year, but please come back in mid-January. You'll see notices about our next webinar. It will be a fireside chat with Dr. Thomas Redman, the data doc, one of the foremost promoters of data quality management, and he will be answering questions on data quality, on some of his writings, and on some of his previous educational presentations. So we hope to see everybody in January. Look for announcements on Data Management U on LinkedIn and through datamanagementu.com's weekly newsletter. For now, thank you again to Yulia. It was fascinating. I'd love to spend at least another hour, maybe 2, on this at some point in the future. So a big round of applause and a big request to come back.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope it was useful and would love to hear feedback.
Thank you very much.